First, I'll explain a little bit where we are and what we do. So I'm from the Burgenland region, which is the most eastern area of Austria. It's very close to the Hungarian border. So it's about 60 kilometers southeast of Vienna. And we have a winery of 20 hectares there. I took over the winery from my parents in 2004. And at that time it was about 13 hectares, and today it's 20. We focus very much on local grape varieties. In our area, we have many different white grape varieties. So for the whites, the most important for us are Weissburgunder, Neuburger, but also Chardonnay, a bit of Furmint, Grüner Veltliner, Muscat. So there's many different local white grapes. And for the reds, it's Zweigelt, Blaufrankisch, St. Laurent, plus a little bit of Pinot Noir. So I think it's quite exciting to work with so many different grape varieties, but the area has many different soils and many different vineyard sites. So it perfectly makes sense to always have the perfect match of grape variety and soil. The area is basically quite flat. We only have one slope where our most important vineyard sites are. And we have a huge lake very close to us, which is quite special because it's so shallow. So it has a huge surface, but it's only 1.5 meters deep, which means that it has a big impact on our climate. It takes a lot of heat during the day and gives it back during the night, which makes our area the warmest wine growing area of all Austria. And we're always the first ones to start harvest in Austria. When I took over in 2004, we changed a few things. We started to convert to biodynamics in 2007. This was a very important step for us because after that, this changed, I think, my whole approach towards winemaking. The main reason for us to convert was to improve the quality of our grapes and thus the quality of our wines. The first step we took was to change the way we worked our soils. So now we have cover crops in all the vineyards, and we also started to work with compost. So we get compost from a farmer. He's my friend. He has organic cows, and we get the manure from him, and then we mix it with straw and all the residuals from the fermentation, so the grape skins, the grape seeds, and then we let it rest for about 6 to 12 months, and then we bring the compost to our vineyards in order to improve soil life and to build up humus in the soils. So a lot of things changed, and after a few years, we could see that also the quality and the taste of our grapes had changed a lot. And so step by step, we also changed the way of working in the cellar, the whole vinification process. So today we work so we do low intervention winemaking. We have only SO2 as an additive, so that's the only additive that we use. And in some wines we don't even use sulfur. So it's a very simple and ancient way of winemaking. The first wine we are going to taste tonight is the Weissburgunder. It should be the number 1 on your list, I think, right? So Weissburgunder is a very typical grape variety of this area. It has been brought to us by French monks in the 14th century. So for us, it's like a local grape variety. And I think it's perfectly adapted to our soils. So I like to plant it in the flat land near the lake, where the soils are gravelly, a gravelly black earth, and they also have a high sand content. So it's quite warm soils. And we use different vineyard sites for this Weissburgunder. So it's a mix of different different vineyards. When the grapes arrive at the cellar, we press them directly. So they go right to the press with the stems, and then the juice is racked into barrels. For me, it's very important to age my wines in barrels for just a couple of months. I think it just makes a big difference compared to a stainless steel tank. I have a nice stock of old barrels because I don't like to use any new wood. I use small barriques, which are old, between 10 and 15 years. And I also have big barrels, casks from my grandparents. They have sizes between 1,000 and 2,000 liters, and they are made from acacia wood. And I like to ferment the Weissburgunder in those. So the juice goes directly to the barrel, and then we just wait until the fermentation starts. So we don't add any yeast, we just put the juice in, and then we wait. After about 2 to 3 days, the fermentation starts. The fermentation takes about 10 to 12 days, and then we just let the wine settle in the barrel, and we leave it on all the lees until we bottle it for about 6 months. It stays on all the lees. For me, the aging on the lees is a very good way of increasing the complexity of a wine. For the Weissburgunder, we add a little bit of SO2 at the bottling, and normally we release the new vintage in March, so it's an aging of about 6 months, as I said. For us, the Weissburgunder is probably the most important grape variety of the area. If you have any questions, then just ask. But for me, that was all for the first wine, for the Weissburgunder. I hope you enjoy it, and if it's okay, we can move on to the next one.
Thanks, Judith. Yeah, it is absolutely delicious. I absolutely love this wine. It's very fresh and mineral and clean. I'm just interested. You talked about using oak, and I think you use oak with all of your wines. A lot of people in modern winemaking use stainless steel with white wine for kind of more freshness but this is actually a really fresh and mineral wine. I wonder whether you could just let us know what that's about, why you're using oak with white wine, and how are you still managing to keep such sort of freshness and minerality rather than sort of overly oaked flavors, should we say?
I like to oxidize my white must. So the grape juice, when it runs down from the press, the last part of it is really brown, so it's completely oxidized. And I think that this is really important for the stability of a wine. If you put a grape juice into a stainless steel tank and do a cold fermentation and keep it very reductive, so without any oxygen, I think that those wines should be consumed quite soon after the bottling. So maybe you can drink them for a year or maybe 2 years. But if you work with oxygen, you get a very stable white wine with a fruit that is going to keep the same for a couple of years. And so by combining the oxygenation that I get through the wooden barrel and the reductive character that the yeast has, because we don't rack it, we keep it on all the lees for all the aging time. I think I get a very stable and complex wine, and I prefer that compared to a style where the flavors are dominated by the cool fermentation style. I don't really like that. So in the barrel, the wines have a fruit that is going to stay, and they are really stable for several years.
Thank you very much.
I mean, I loved this wine the first time I ever tried it, and I love it every time I've drunk it since. I think it's a great way to start this little tasting. To reflect, for anyone who hasn't drank much Austrian wine before, it can be quite lean and quite high acid and quite linear. And I always find with your wines, even in your whites, that processing that you're using is giving them so much complexity, but flesh, but in a very elegant way. There's just such enjoyable balance to it all. They're kind of exciting but modest at the same time.
I think this is something that's maybe special for Austrian wine, that the wines are very easy and approachable, I think. So quite fruit driven, but they also have a lot of complexity in them. So they really make an evolution in the glass. With every sip, you discover something new, and that's what I want my wines to be. I want them to be lively and pure, and they're just alive, and there is something going on in the glass, and the wines change all the time.
Do you think, maybe following on from that, someone in the chat room has asked if you follow the moon cycles? I wonder if you could just touch on very briefly what biodynamics is. I know you mentioned it. I know it's something you practice, and maybe how that affects the kind of life that you talk about in your wines.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, actually, should we move on to the next wine and we can talk about biodynamics as we move on, just conscious of time as well. But definitely be good. We want to know, there's a very good question about moon cycles in there, so that'd be good to
okay.
That.
So the second one is the Neuburger, so the second white, the number 2 on your list. And so Neuburger is probably, most people have never heard of that grape variety. It's quite typical for Austria. It's not only grown in our area, but also in other wine growing areas in Austria. It's nobody really knows where it comes from. The origins seem to be in Wachau, but it was also widespread in the Burgenland, especially in the 60s and 70s. My parents, they used to grow a lot of the Neuburger grape, but then somehow in the 80s, end of the 80s, it got very unpopular, and they had troubles in selling the Neuburger wines they made. And finally, they removed everything. And when I started, we had 0 Neuburger wines. Then in 2003, I decided to replant, and it's a very small vineyard. We don't have a lot, and I really like it a lot. Neuburger is quite special. It's a grape that's very tasty as a fresh fruit, just to eat it from the vine. It tastes very, very good, and it has a lot of pectin, which means that it's quite hard to press. So as I explained before with the Weissburgunder, where we do a direct pressing, you could not do that with the Neuburger, because you would have maybe 50% of the juice out of the grapes. So what we do is we do a maceration. We keep the crushed grapes it's a stainless steel, looks like a flower pot, a 1,000 liter stainless steel flower pot. And we can move that underneath our destemmer. So the stems, they fall out, and all the berries, they go into the flower pot, as we call it. So we keep the juice and the skins together for about 10 to maximum 12 days. And by doing this, so it's basically fermented like a red wine. And by doing this, we manage to get all the flavors out of the skins, because most of the flavors of the grapes is in the skins. And we also extract a little bit of the tannins from the skins, which means that we get a lot of structure on the palate. And Neuburger is a grape that does not have a lot of acidity. So I really like to work with skin contact with the Neuburger because we get that extra structure on the palate through the tannins instead of acidity. And when we started doing skin contact wines, that was in 2011, it was just so amazing for us to see how much more flavor there was in all our grape varieties. And we did it with many different grapes, and it was fantastic. It was so much fun to see, and we were wondering why we hadn't done that years earlier, because it just makes so much sense to do that. So skin contact, and then we press it. I always like to press the skin contact wines before the fermentation is completely finished. And here this is to avoid too much oxidation, because when you press the wine, there is a lot of oxygen, and I like to keep the freshness. That's why we press before the fermentation is finished, move the wine to the barrel, and then the fermentation is still going on in the barrel, which means that there is CO2 in the barrel and the wine is perfectly protected against too much oxygen. So I would not call it an orange wine. For me, it's just a natural wine because it does not have too much of an orange color. It still looks like a white wine, I think. And we keep it in the barrel again on all the lees for about 1 year before we bottle it. And here we don't use any sulfur. It just goes directly to the bottle. Yeah.
Thank you very much. This is absolutely delicious. So the key, it's interesting what you say there about it not being, you wouldn't call it an orange wine. It's something that's been a bit of we've had a lot of interest in orange wine. It's something that we really enjoy, but it's always difficult to know exactly where the line is. A little bit of skin contact on a white grape variety, does that make it an orange wine? Yeah, but this is got so much flavour and concentration, and it's absolutely delicious. I'm quite interested. I hadn't heard of Neuburger before we looked at your wines. And something that we really love is unusual and interesting indigenous varieties, and that's something that you seem to place a lot of importance on. I was wondering if you could explain why you don't use, I don't know, more well-known varietals that might be easier for you to sell.
You mean why we use the indigenous grape varieties?
Yeah, why do you use the kind of local indigenous grape varieties?
So I really love to work with many different grapes, and I really like to find out what the character of a grape variety is. So instead of reducing grape varieties, we took up several more grapes. So we now have a small plot of Fourmint and a small plot of Horschle Velu, which is a Hungarian grape variety, and Fourmint as well. I think that, so on one hand, it's just about tradition, because my father already worked with the Neuburger, and actually I've always liked it. And now I have my own interpretation of the Neuburger. I'm doing a completely different style of it. And I'm really very happy that I discovered the tool of skin contact for myself, because it just helps me so much to get that structure and freshness that I really like about white wines. And this was just such a great discovery for us in the winery. And yeah, so I just like it. I like the old grapes. I like to work with the traditional indigenous varieties that we have. And there is some, I think we are so lucky to have all those different grapes in our area, because there are wine growing areas without any interesting natural grapes. And so I think we should focus on this and put more effort in all those old grape varieties that we have.
You've been dealt a good hand in some ways.
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah.
Could you just briefly explain what the significance of Bambule is?
So sorry, yeah. Bambule is a range of natural wines that we started in 2011. Because when I started producing wine, so my father had a conventional winery, and I went to winemaking school, and we were taught a very conventional way of winemaking, and then we converted to biodynamics, and the whole thing started somehow, and my whole approach changed. And so finally we had some natural wines, but we still had that old range that my father used to have before. So I decided that we should find a name for this new range of wines, and this is the Bambule range. And all the Bambule wines are nothing added and nothing removed, so they are zero intervention wines. And Bambule is a German word which means something like riot or being very loud, doing things in a very loud way. And that's why we found that this word is quite suitable for this range of wines.
Great. So I'm conscious we did have a question earlier on about biodynamics. So it'd be nice to talk about whether the thing that people always talk about with biodynamics is, do you follow the cycles of the moon, and why do you do that? But yeah, just be interesting to hear a bit more about processes that you use and why you think they're important. Happy to move on to another wine whilst doing it.
Yeah, so we follow the moon cycles as good as we can, because if you do it in a 100% perfect way, you would have only a very short time for all the work that needs to be done. So for example, during harvest, we're picking every day because we cannot choose, because otherwise the grapes are going to be rotten. But it's very important for me to do the bottling according to the moon cycles. So I think this is probably the most important thing for me, because you can always tell that the wine goes through different phases during 1 month. And it's not that I look at the calendar every day, but when we taste, most of the time we just feel that, for example, it's a root day because the wine does not taste as we had expected it to taste, or as it tasted the last time when we tasted it. But for the bottling, I think it's really important to choose a good moment. So I like to bottle with the rising moon. So that there is the what's it called in English? So now when the moon gets fuller.
So you've got waxing and waning moon.
Yeah. So not the waxing and waning moon, but the rising and descending moon.
Okay.
So this is even more significant for the wines. So we choose the rising moon, and then we choose, if possible, fruit days or flower days for the
explain fruit and flower and root days. I think people might not know what that means.
So this is very complex because it's about all the cosmic influences. So all the biodynamic dates back to Rudolf Steiner, who actually all he ever did on agriculture was he did 8 lectures, and that was in 1924, and that's basically all he ever did. And this is the basis of all the biodynamic agriculture. And after that, people started to work with all the recipes and suggestions that he gave, and founded the biodynamic practice. And so there is a whole philosophy behind it, and you could read for years probably on biodynamics. But for me, the most important thing is the soil. So we really try to improve our soil every year, and I think this also makes the biggest difference in the grapes. And if you have a more stable soil, you have better grapes, you have a more stable wine, and then you can also work without any stabilization in the wines. It's not just about not adding sulfur, it's a whole different approach from the beginning. And only if you have grapes who are strong and stable enough, then you can choose to work without SO2. Other than the soil life, we use the biodynamic preparations, so the Horn manure and the Horn silica preparation. And we also work with a lot of herbal infusions, herbal teas that we spray on the vineyards. Also, a central thing in biodynamics is that an estate should be self-sufficient. Is that what you call it? So you should have a cycle within your farm, and this means that you should also have animals. Like ideally, you should have cows, because then you could use your own manure, make your own compost from your own manure for your own plants. My grandparents, they still had like a small farm and they had animals, but then my parents in the 70s, they decided to focus on wine only. So today we don't have stables anymore. We don't have all the facilities that you need for having animals. But at least now we have 40 chickens. So we have a vineyard with a fence around, and it's 1.4 hectares, so it's quite big. And we have very beautiful chickens there who give wonderful eggs. So that's at least a start. We would like to have more animals. Actually, I would love to have pigs. Maybe we will manage one day.
Sounds lovely. Should we move on to the next wine?
Yeah, the next wine is the ink. Okay, so that's the number 3, right? Yeah.
Number 3, exactly, yes.
Number 3 on your list. And this wine is a blend of 2 indigenous grape varieties. It's 80% Zweigelt and 20% St. Laurent. Zweigelt is the red grape that's mostly grown in Austria. And it's a grape with a lot of fruit. It has a very fruity character, has smooth tannins, and is early ripening. For me, the Zweigelt is kind of an all-rounder, which means that you can plant it on many different soils, and you'll get nice results. Even in the plain land, it's always fruit-driven and juicy style of red wine. I like to combine it with the St. Laurent, because St. Laurent is quite unique. It's a grape variety that's related to Pinot Noir. So it has very thin skins. It has a very dense punch, and it has nice acidity, and it has very unique flavors. And that's why I like to use it in the blend. So the Zweigelt has a lot of fruit, and then the St. Laurent adds spice and a lot of character in the wine, I think. Because the St. Laurent has such thin skins, and as I told you in the beginning, that we have that huge lake in the area, which means that we have a lot of evaporation and humidity. We always have to be very careful with the St. Laurent, because botrytis is always an issue. So what we do is after the flowering, when the grapes are still green, we cut the bunches in half. So we remove the lower part, the lower half of the bunch, in order to get more space and make create a looser bunch of grapes. And this really helps a lot and works very well with the St. Laurent. So here we do a fermentation in stainless steel. Both grapes are fermented separately. We only do the blending before we bottle. And after the fermentation, the wines go to old barrels. So again, this wine is aged in barrels. So it's just important to me. I think it makes a huge difference. And then after like 8 to 10 months, we do the blending and the wine goes to the bottle. There is a little bit of SO2 in this wine, but no filtration or no fining.
Yeah, I find the use of oak in your wines, I just think it comes through in such a delicate way. And you mentioned a few times that you use old wood. So you're not getting any oaky flavors in your wines at all. You're just getting this lovely kind of softness and texture, and just as you say, you're working with oxygen, so you're getting a nice sort of gentle aging, and it comes through in the whites and the reds, and it's what I really love about them. We've actually had a question from Daniel Sorgo. I'm sorry if I've got pronounced your surname incorrectly there. And he says, how did your family feel about making the change to biodynamics?
So my father, he was considering converting to organic farming before, but he never had. There was never the team was never big enough. There was never enough manpower in the winery to do that, and I don't think that he would ever have done biodynamics, but he really supported us, and he until now he's doing so much work in the vineyards, and he I don't know what he really thinks about all the philosophy. I don't think that this is just his cup of tea, but at least he supports what we are doing, and he also sees and appreciates the changes in the wines, and I think he likes most of them.
The proof's in the pudding. He likes the outcome. He's not sure about the method.
Yeah. Not so sure about how we get there, but he likes the outcome.
Yeah. We've got another question as well about are you interested in using concrete eggs or amphora? So we're getting quite technical now.
We started to use amphoras a couple of years ago. We're using they are made from a special clay, and they are burnt very hot, which means that they are quite dense. So I would say that they are even tighter than a wooden barrel, and I like that about it. I'm not so interested in working with those amphoras that give more oxygenation than a barrel would. So I always like to stick to that rather fresh and not too oxidized style. So oxidation with the grape juice before the fermentation, but after the fermentation, I like to keep the wines reductive. So the idea of using an amphora is actually to have a container that is completely neutral, that does not add any flavor to the flavor that you get from your vineyard, from the grapes. And I think that those amphoras that we have, they are more neutral than the barrels, but I don't think that they are completely neutral. Again, they add something different to the wine. It's different compared to the barrels, but still it's not neutral. Yeah, but I think it's a great container for producing and for aging wine, and we're going to buy more of those amphoras. They're quite big. They have 1,000 liters, and I think they're quite good.
We've had a couple of, well, one exclamated, "Wow, this is amazing," from Dom. And Tom and Liz have said, received a bottle of this as a gift last year and loved it. It's the reason we joined tonight. The ink, it just, I mean, I don't know what it's, how it is from your perspective, but it is one of those kind of like iconic wines here on the kind of contemporary wine scene in the UK. And I think it's one of those, it's eye-catching, to say the least. But you can't get away with just having a pretty label. It obviously, carries on into the wine. And I think the thing I love about this is it's so tangible. The using the ink as kind of a descriptor for the wine. It's inky black. It gives you a really tangible kind of suggestion. You don't need to know anything about wine to kind of get the vibe of what it's going to taste like, or have a little. And I feel like that is maybe partly why it's so successful. But I'm not really asking you a question. I'm just saying it's got a lot of love from our customers. But it's really nice to do this as well, because it's great to then have the chance to show them the whole range. And we've had a few people buy the ink and then come back and either ask for it again, and we put them onto one of your other wines and said, you've got to try something else, or they've come and done that research for themselves. So yeah, it's a gateway wine. you never look back.
Are there any more questions now? I
think that's it. We've had another comment. I forgot how good this wine is, from Kat. So yeah, people are loving the wine, but yeah, we can move on.
Okay. Then, so yeah, now I would like to switch. I would like to do the Zweigelt before the Blaufrankisch.
So wine number 5.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Wine number 5. Okay, so this is the varietal Zweigelt we're going to taste now, and it's all from vineyards in the flat area near the lake, where we have that black earth and gravel soil. Zweigelt is actually it was when they made the cross in the 1920s, they were looking for a grape variety which would produce high yield. So this was the idea they had at that time. So we always have to do green harvest. We always have to reduce the yield with the Zweigelt in order to get good quality. Because ideally, my ideal would be not to do any green harvest, to get the grapes, to get the vines in such a balance that we just don't need to do that they would never produce too much. But with the Zweigelt, it's a bit difficult. I think we might get there in a couple of years, but for now, it's just in its genes to produce a lot of grapes. So a lot of green harvest, we do that in July normally, and Zweigelt is the grape we pick in the middle of harvest. So it's not the first one, but it's after the whites and after the St. Laurent, then we move to the Zweigelt. So all our grapes are hand picked, and then the Zweigelt is destemmed. We don't do any crushing, so part of the berries are still intact when they arrive in the stainless steel tank where they do the fermentation, and then we do a maceration of about 2 weeks with the Zweigelt. After that, again, we age it in used barriques for about 10 months.
What's the relevance of how long? Obviously, you harvest grapes when they're at their optimum ripeness, but what difference does it make if a grape such as Zweigelt? So you're saying this takes
Dauert
You
noch.
have to harvest this in
Sag
it.
halt schnell Hallo. Sorry, it's my son.
Hey.
Hey.
So, es dauert noch ein bisschen, okay? Gehst du rauf, bitte? Ich muss mich selber hinbringen. Sorry for this.
Classic Zoom meeting, isn't it?
Please say again.
So yeah, just wondering about Zweigelt takes a little bit longer to ripen than some grape varieties, and then you have other grape varieties which take even longer. How does that impact the style of the wine, the length of time the grape takes to harvest?
I think it's very important to choose the right moment of picking, but usually the grapes that ripen earlier, they are also the first to start the season. So as you always say, it's about 100 days from the flowering to the harvest. And some grape varieties, they have an earlier flowering, then they are to pick earlier. So the period stays the same more or less. It's not always true and not in every vintage, because we've had some very hot vintages during the last 2 decades, and we definitely had less than those 100 days that people always talk of. But what really changed a lot since we've done biodynamics is that now we can pick earlier, and we still have ripe fruit, which means that ripeness is achieved at an earlier stage. So we end up with grapes that have lower sugar, which then means lower alcohol in the wines. But still the wines are perfectly mature, and they are well balanced. So this was a very obvious change after a couple of years of biodynamics. And I find this very interesting because it's in our village, there are a lot of wine producers. So we have about, 1,500 hectares of wines, and you can find everything: organic, biodynamic, but also a lot of conventionally farmed vineyards. And before harvest, when you compare the biodynamic vineyards to the conventional ones, when you taste the grapes, it's such a big difference, because they are always like a week ahead, even if it's one vineyard next to the other. So I think those things that we always believed were like rules, like those 100 days, for example, although those things can change if you just change the way of working in the vineyard.
Wow. So biodynamically farmed wines tend to actually produce wines with, what you're saying, is sort of lower alcohol,
yeah,
and more sort of freshness and finesse, I guess.
Definitely.
Yeah. There is a question here from Holly Simpson. How do you get the vine to produce less grapes and not green harvest?
Different things. So first, if you work your soil a lot, you always you set free nitrogen, and this means that you get a lot more growth, and the vines tend to get more productive. So we all between our vines, we always have herbs and grass and clover and different plants. We try to have as many different plants as possible, and this is gives a bit of a what's it called, a competition to the plant. So it takes the cover crops take water and minerals, and so this helps to reduce the vigor of the vines, and also the production of the vines. There you have many different ways of doing it. We also have a bit higher planting density than we used to have, so we have about 6,000 plants per hectare now, whereas in the 70s in our area they had only 3,000. This also changes the vigor and the productivity of the plants.
So you pack more vines in and you give them more competition.
Yeah,
Things in the vineyards, and then they produce less fruit as a result.
but it is also about getting the plant into a balance, and this already starts with the pruning system that you apply. So we do a so-called gentle pruning, and this also helps us to get more regular shoots and a better balance in the entire plant. And but sometimes, sometimes you need to do green harvest because it happens that we have a very, very dry season, and then the plants, they really might lack water, and then you would reduce the yield a little bit just to help the plant to get some of the grapes to a perfectly ripe stage. I mean, a vineyard is it always and it always will be a monoculture, and by working with cover crops, you can just try to improve things, but it's never going to be like an ecosystem like a forest or whatever. It is a man-made thing finally. But we try to have as many plants as possible, and we try to attract insects. We try to attract birds. We put bird houses in all our vineyards. So by doing this, we are trying to get more balance in all aspects, actually.
Okay, should we go on to the last wine?
Okay, the last one is the blue one, the Blaufrankisch.
Is wine number 4.
So for me, Blaufrankisch is the most interesting and the most valuable grape that we have in the area. It's the latest ripening one, so we only planted on the slopes where we have the most possible sun hours. It's a southwest exposed slope that we have here, and the soils are sandy loam and limestone. Blaufrankisch is a grape that shows a lot of the soil where it's growing, so it can have very different characters, from as fruity and delicate as maybe a Pinot Noir, but it can also be a very dark and earthy style of wine, depending on the soils and the area where it is growing. So we do a bit of a different vinification on the Blaufrankisch, because the Blaufrankisch is for me, it's a wine that needs more oxygen than a Zweigelt, for example. It will develop slower than a Zweigelt would. That's why we ferment it in a wooden fermenter. And the wooden fermenter is with an open top, so it gets more oxygen already during the fermentation. It has much more tannins than a Zweigelt has. It has a higher acidity, and I think it's a wine that can age very, very well. You can keep it for a long time. The aging process is similar to the Zweigelt. We also put it in used barriques where we keep it for 10 to 12 months.
Delicious.
Yeah, it's really interesting seeing the progression through the wines. And I can see why you put the Zweigelt last, because it's just got this, sorry, Blaufrankisch last. Because it's just, yeah, ultimately it's got a lot of concentration and depth and more body, and yeah, there's a lovely there's a lovely sort of continuity through the wines, in the you can see your style coming through. which is this lovely kind of deep, dark fruits and ripeness and finesse, and sort of more richness and complexity as we go through the wines.
Is that something that you'd say was? Do you have kind of a goal in mind with your wines, or is it more of they are a reflection of how you work with the land through biodynamics, and they're just this is the result, or is it something you kind of strive to produce elegance within these quite rich grape varieties in quite a hot part of Austria?
I would love my wines to reflect the area, the soils, and also the vintage. I really want them to be different in every single vintage, because the vintages the vintages can be so different in our area, and I think it's a shame when wines taste more or less the same every year. So I think you should always feel what the weather was like in a certain year, and still in the end they are also a reflection of myself, because I think that the person that produces the wine cannot be excluded from the terroir thing, you know. The people, the persons, the humans, they have a very big impact on what a wine tastes like. Because if you give grapes from the same plot to two different people, it will be two completely different wines. And I think this is just so special about wine, that it can be so different and it can be so special. And I think this should be felt in each of my wines.
I feel like that's something that's perhaps not discussed enough. The significance of when we talk about terroir and talk about soil types and climate and etc. But perhaps one of the most important things is that you're the starting point, aren't you, or the guiding force throughout all of that.
I believe in that. I think that the humans are the most or probably have the most impact on the taste of a wine, more than a soil or a climate could ever have.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not, I think it's just hundreds of small decisions, insignificant decisions probably, that in the end make the big difference.
We've got a question from Jess W and Caroline H. Can you show us a picture of your vineyards? It's hard to imagine with all the herbs and everything. It sounds lovely and really interesting. I don't know whether how easily we can get a picture of your vineyards on screen. Where can people see your vineyards? Is it on your website or anything?
It's on the website, yeah. But if I would be more professional, I would have prepared some photos probably, but I'm still not a Zoom expert, and now I'm using my daughter's laptop, so there are no photos on this one. So I'm really sorry about that.
No, that's okay.
But you can see some pictures on the website. It's or maybe some on Instagram also. Yeah.
We've got another question from Daniel Sorgo. How often do you and your family actually drink your own wine?
Not very often. So I'm tasting my own wines, but when we sit down to open a bottle, we drink something different, because we want to taste new things, taste other wines from colleagues, taste wines from other areas. So we hardly ever open a bottle and really finish it. It's mostly just about tasting it and what's it like today, what was it like last week. But we love to drink wines of our colleagues and other people. Yeah.
I guess there's you're tasting your wines all the time in the cellar, right?
Yeah.
There's constantly. I think some people perhaps don't always realise the reality of what it is to be a winemaker, and and that it's not a product you, I don't know, just manufacture or print or whatever. It's you know, you've got different wines coming out throughout the year depending on how long and how much time each wine needs, and I'm sure you're in there all the time tasting different things and seeing how they evolve.
Yeah.
We've just had another question saying, is there any interesting developments coming up from your vineyard that we should watch out for soon? So I think we're looking for a sneak peek, a little insight into anything exciting you might have coming up.
Actually, there are many things, because this is only a small part of the range. We do about, I don't know, 22 different wines, because we have so many different grape varieties, and then you do an experiment on something and then you really like it, and then we go, okay, why then we bottle it because we like it so much, and then again we add another wine to the portfolio. Yeah, but I'm really looking forward to Fourmint, because for me it's a very interesting grape. It has a lot of acidity, and it can deal with sandy and dry soils and hot climates. So with climate change, I think it can be an interesting grape variety for us in the future. There is also Welsch Riesling, and there is also the Haus Levelou, which we only planted last year, and which I don't know what's going to be the outcome of this, but it's so exciting, and we always have to wait a very long time until we see the results of our works, and we only get one chance per year to produce something decent from the grapes that we get.